We live in a moment defined by fraying borders between catastrophe and routine. Cities hum with a brittle noise of alerts and updates. The air tastes of worry, and mornings can arrive like a new sheet of bad news. How do you keep a steady breath when everything outside seems to tilt? Albert Camus lived through occupations, bombardments, and moral collapses that made normal life look like an illusion. And he offers a lens that does not console with cheap hope, but that refuses to abandon the human task of staying sane. This is not a pep talk or a call to pretend everything is fine. It is an invitation to learn practices that hold dignity when the world does not promise meaning. Today, we will read Camus as a practical guide to maintaining lucidity, turning despair into quiet resistance, and everyday acts of care. We will use the plague as a laboratory for ethical choices, and we will test those choices against modern scenes of isolation, frontline work, and neighborly solidarity. If this topic matters to you, subscribe and come back for more conversations about how to live honestly in difficult times. This will not give easy answers. It will give a new way to choose how to live. Albert Camus is often read as a theorist of the absurd, but he was first a reporter, a novelist, and a man of action. Born in Algeria, he grew up amid Mediterranean light and working-class scarcity, later witnessing the Spanish Civil War and the German occupation of France. He refused tidy certainties and insisted that the world is indifferent to human yearning for absolute meaning. For him, the absurd is not a doctrine but a condition to be recognized, the collision between our need for clarity and the universe's suggestion of silence. That recognition, however painful, clears a space for revolt. Camus defined revolt not as theatrical defiance, but as an ongoing affirmation of human dignity in the face of indifference. In practice, revolt becomes an ethics of solidarity, a refusal to despair, and a commitment to small, concrete acts that preserve integrity. The idea matters because modern crises do not respond to grand narratives. Climate scares, pandemics, political breakdowns, and personal losses do not ask for metaphysical solutions. What they do require is attention, stubbornness, and the capacity to act without guarantees. Camus teaches that lucidity is a skill as much as an insight, and that the pathway from confusion to action runs through honest confrontation with facts and sustained care for others. The human problem at the center of this philosophy is the hunger for meaning and the suffering that follows when meaning is denied. People respond in predictable and destructive ways. Some fall into a frantic search for a master story that explains everything. Others retreat into nihilism, concluding that nothing matters and therefore anything is permitted. Both reactions collapse the possibility of sustained ethics. Psychological consequences follow: chronic anxiety, depressive flattening, a compulsion toward denial.
That looks like optimism, but that erases moral responsibility. In clinical terms, obsessional rumination and avoidance become two faces of the same failure to live in the present. The search for a final answer becomes a cage. This is why Camus demands a third route. He asks us to stop demanding cosmic justification for our choices, and instead to choose acts that affirm life even when there is no ultimate reason to do so. That shift transforms suffering not by removing it, but by relocating its meaning into practices that preserve dignity. When we accept the absence of cosmic meaning, we are free to create human meanings anchored in responsibility. The alternative is what Camus calls revolt. Revolt is not a slogan or a strategy. It is a daily posture. It begins with lucid acceptance of the situation and continues with repeated commitments to concrete acts. Revolt differs from hope because it does not hinge on a promised outcome. It differs from nihilism because it retains moral seriousness. What does revolt look like in concrete terms? It looks like a nurse sitting with a patient, a neighbor bringing food to an isolated elderly person, a teacher showing up even when enrollments drop, a writer keeping language honest despite public pressure. These acts require no cosmic reassurance. They require patience, habit, and an ethical backbone. Practical practices include small rituals of presence, like regular check-ins, writing short notes to people who are struggling, keeping a daily record of things you did to help, and committing to one sustained relationship of care. Another practice is disciplined truth-telling, learning to describe what is happening without embellishment or denial, and making decisions based on that clear report. Resistance in this sense is not headline-ready. It is the accumulation of honest acts that preserve community. To make this philosophy tangible, we will use the plague as a case study, and also imagine a contemporary neighborhood under prolonged quarantine. Picture a coastal town with empty markets, the smell of salt and disinfectant in the same breath, pigeons turning inert in plazas, and the sound of distant engines. Sight, smell, sound, touch, and taste are all altered. The town becomes a soundscape of clipped conversations, of footsteps on wet cobblestone, of the metallic smell of antiseptics. People move like they are wearing layers of worry. In that environment, small choices become tests of character. Camus populated his novel with characters who embody different responses. We will map those responses onto new figures in our imagined town so that the ethic of revolt becomes visible and applicable. In scenes where medical workers decide whom to save, or where citizens debate whether to flee, we will listen to their conversations, note the sensory details, and learn which practices preserve dignity. The protagonist of this piece is a community organizer named Anna. She grew up in a multi-generational household near the harbor, the child of a fisher and a seamstress. Her childhood memories are of oil lamps, sardine smoke, and neighbors who bartered bread for a mended net. She learned early that survival is woven out of small favors and stubborn togetherness. As a young adult, she studied social work, moved to the city, and returned home after a factory closure left entire families without steady wages. She has a habit of waking before dawn to sweep the front steps of her building and to leave a thermos of coffee for whoever is awake. Her political faith is practical rather than doctrinaire. She believes in systems and she believes in persons. That duality frames the way she reads Camus, not as a remote philosopher, but as a guidebook for deciding whom to sit with when alarms sound. In her 30s, her partner left, and she found herself parenting a teenage cousin and caring for an aging aunt with tremors. Those responsibilities taught her the economy of choice. She cannot save everyone, but she can show up consistently. That history gives her the credibility to organize neighborhood networks during a crisis and the humility to know that courage is often a small thing practiced daily. Her backstory is a map of loyalties, losses, neighborly ties, and an education that tied philosophical reflection to knuckles scarred from work. We name other people in this town so you can see how communal ethics operate. Maria runs a pharmacy and organizes medicine deliveries. Jonas is a retired mechanic who fixes generators. Leah teaches children from her kitchen table. Amir is an ambulance driver who refuses to speak about his worst nights. Sophia tends a rooftop garden that becomes a source of food and conversation. Mateo catalogs the neighborhood history and keeps lists of the elderly who need calls. Nurse Eliza coordinates shifts at the clinic and insists on transparent reporting of cases. Father Bernard leads ad hoc vigils that are more about companionship than prayer. Each one performs a recognizable act. Maria measures pills and listens. Jonas works with grease-smudged hands and a quiet hum of gratitude. Leah translates complicated government guidelines into simple drawings for kids. Amir calls families at odd hours. Sophia shares bitter greens and laughter. Mateo writes names on a board to remember who has been helped. Nurse Eliza records symptoms with careful pensiveness. Father Bernard opens doors for conversations that are not about theology but about presence. Dialogue scenes show how decisions are negotiated under pressure. In a central scene, Anna meets with Maria, Jonas, Leah, Amir, Sophia, Mateo, Nurse Eliza, and Father Bernard to decide how to prioritize resources. The scene is slow and detailed, each voice distinct, and the exchanges are long enough to reflect real deliberation. Anna says, "We need a plan and we need it now."
Maria replies, "I agree, but we have limited pills and no cold chain for some vaccines." Jonas asks, "What about the generator at the community center? Can we keep it running?" Leah adds, "The children need stability, even if it is just." "Routine lessons by the window," Amir warns. "We cannot keep sending people without protective gear. The clinic is overwhelmed," Sophia suggests. "We can start by sharing food from the rooftop every other day," Mateo says. "I will make a register of who has already received help and who is housebound," Nurse Eliza insists. "We must document symptoms and make a triage list based on need, not influence." Father Bernard offers, "I will organize volunteers for non-medical support, like carrying food." Anna counters, "We must be honest about scarcity and divide work so we do not burn out," Maria says. "Then we set shifts and clear rules. No heroics, only rotation," Jonas asks. "Who will fetch more supplies if markets are closed?" Amir answers, "I will, but only with 2 others, and we will follow the safety list," Leah finishes. "Then we teach the kids these safety habits and keep a little time each day for play," Sophia smiles. "And I will bring greens and the children will plant them on the roof," Mateo nods. "I will update the register every evening and leave it at the gate so everyone can see," Nurse Eliza says. "This is how we keep our dignity, by being transparent and reachable." Father Bernard looks around and says, "Presence is our liturgy now, not words but acts." The group agrees with small, exhausted laughs, and a shared rhythm of duty forms. In that dialogue, we hear the texture of moral decision-making. Each exchange carries sensory markers, like Maria rubbing the rim of a pill bottle, Jonas wiping oil off his hands, Leah tracing a chalk outline for kids, Amir breathing with tiredness, Sophia crushing herbs between her fingers, Mateo tapping a list with a pencil, Nurse Eliza snapping lids closed in neat, efficient movements, Father Bernard folding his hands as if to steady himself. Those small details anchor the ethical choices in lived reality. Moments of tension must be slowed down so that internal conflict becomes visible. Moment 1 happens when a new cluster of cases emerges and someone has to decide whether to close the market. The town hall hums with heated voices, and the air carries the metallic tang of fear. Anna remembers a summer when her father sat silent while a net came undone, and the memory of that helplessness propels her toward a decision. She chooses to close the market for 3 days and to coordinate deliveries instead. The paragraph after shows her indecision at night when the empty stalls look like accusation. She listens for footsteps that do not come and feels the weight of being the one who ordered closure. In the second paragraph, she recalls her seamstress mother sewing masks in the dark, and that memory supplies a steady hand. The decision, small in the sweep of history, feels like a moral turning point. Moment 2 occurs when Nurse Eliza finds a child with symptoms and the family begs for a miracle cure. The first paragraph traces the smell of disinfectant and a brass light above the cot, the warmth of a small body and a parent face carved with panic. Eliza fights the impulse to promise more than she can deliver. The second paragraph returns to a memory of her first night on duty when she promised the same and could not keep it. She chooses honesty and simple comfort instead of false hope, cataloging symptoms and arranging a home visit. The act of telling the truth becomes an act of care. Moment 3 is a confrontation between Jonas and a group of young men who want to loot a supply truck. The first paragraph describes the greasy hands of Jonas gripping a makeshift bar, the burnt scent of tires, and the thunder of raised voices. His internal conflict appears as a memory of his brother taken by illness when he did not intervene. The second paragraph shows his choice to speak to the youths, to redirect their anger into helping with delivery shifts in exchange for meals. The tension dissolves into organized labor and a new sense of belonging. Moment 4 is an evening when Anna reads a list of names and discovers one name that she knows is her estranged cousin recently returned. The first paragraph describes the sudden bright ache in her chest, the smell of rain, the creak of the gate, and her hand staining with ink as she crosses the name. Her memory of an old argument resurfaces. The second paragraph shows her decision not to punish, but to bring a loaf of bread and a chair. She moves toward reconciliation because the present demands presence more than rightness. These moments of tension are not spectacles. They are scenes where ethics is tested and revealed as habit. Each resolved tension builds the muscle of revolt. Applications follow from the town to your life. The practical toolkit contains repeatable steps you can practice. First, cultivate lucid reporting. Each morning, write a short list of facts, not feelings. Describe what is happening in precise terms. Second, establish one reliable node of care. Choose one person or one group you will contact 3 times a week. Third, practice small rituals of presence, like tea at the same hour with a neighbor or a 10-minute phone call. Fourth, keep a public register if you are in a position to organize so that decisions become transparent and fatigue can be rotated. Fifth, make a habit of refusal to indulge fantasies of total control and instead build micro-practices of support. The town uses these methods. Maria sets fixed delivery days. Jonas organizes rotating shifts for equipment maintenance. Leah creates printed cards for pandemic hygiene. Amir keeps a log of routes. Sophia distributes greens on a schedule. Mateo posts a nightly update on a board. Nurse Eliza runs short training sessions in the community center, and Father Bernard convenes circles of listening. Each character performs an action that is small but accumulative. These practices are exercises.
They are not guaranteed to stop disaster, but they preserve human dignity and prevent moral collapse. Lucidity frees action from the tyranny of meaning. Instead of waiting for the world to be different, revolt asks you to act now with integrity. That is the real freedom Camus describes. It is not the freedom of nihilistic license, but the freedom to choose responsibly within limits. As the crisis eases in the town, there is no triumphant finale. There are birthdays marked in modest ways, hospital beds gradually clearing, and markets reopening with new rules. People keep scars and new routines. The final analysis is that lucidity and freedom are connected by daily practice. A clear perception of reality dissolves illusions that either paralyze or inflate. Choosing to act with dignity amid indifference is an exercise of freedom that preserves sanity. If this reflection resonated with you, pause now and write in the comments what your single most difficult day was in the past year and how you managed to keep going. Start your comment with "My hardest day was" so others can easily read and respond. Sharing helps the community learn, and it makes practical solidarity possible. Thank you for being part of this conversation. To close, remember that the world will not always make sense, and that you are not defective for noticing that. Lucidity is the practice of seeing clearly and then deciding to act. Revolt is the daily refusal to let despair define you. Small, repeated acts of care are how dignity survives. Subscribe if you want more discussions that blend literature, philosophy, and practical tools for staying sane. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that presence matters more than explanations. How will you choose to act today? Even in ruin, your choices define who you are. Choose with lucidity and compassion.